The humiliation didn't arrive loudly. It came disguised as a celebration. The table was set on the back deck of my beach house, my house, though no one used that word anymore. The air smelled like salt and grilled shrimp, and the old wind chimes I had hung 20 years ago clinked nervously against each other, as if they sensed what I couldn't yet name. My daughter-in-law stood at the head of the table, one manicured hand resting dramatically on her stomach, the other holding a crystal wine glass that caught the last of the sunset. Her heels clicked once against the wooden planks to demand attention. "I have news," she said, smiling in that way people do when they expect applause before they've earned it. My son beamed beside her. Everyone leaned in. I was still sitting. "I'm pregnant." The word detonated. Gasps, laughter, chairs scraping back. Someone knocked over a napkin holder. My son wrapped his arms around her waist, spinning her as if they were characters in a commercial. The wine sloshed dangerously close to the rim of her glass. I noticed that before anything else. The glass. The deep red stain already blooming at the bottom. No one noticed me. I stood slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from my linen blouse, the one I'd ironed myself that afternoon, my mouth open to speak, congratulate, maybe ask how far along she was, but she raised her hand toward me without looking. "And this," she continued, still holding the wine, "is why we cannot let you sell the house." The words hit harder than the announcement. Silence fell, sharp and sudden. She finally looked at me then, eyes cool, measuring, the way a buyer looks at a piece of furniture they're not sure is worth keeping. "This baby needs stability," she said, "and honestly, you don't anymore." A few people laughed nervously. My son didn't correct her. I felt my face heat, not with anger yet, but with something older. Shame. The kind that creeps in when you realize you've been slowly erased without noticing the ink fade. "I was planning to move closer to the city," I said quietly. "My doctor—" "Oh, Mom," my son interrupted, smiling the way he used to when he was 12 and lying. "Don't be dramatic. You have everything you need here." She took a sip of her wine, a long one. I watched her swallow. Something shifted inside me, not fully formed yet, but heavy, like a chess piece being lifted from the board held mid-air. She leaned closer to me, lowering her voice just enough to make it sting. "Besides," she said, "this house isn't really yours anymore, is it?" Laughter followed, louder this time. The ocean crashed below us, indifferent. And that's when I understood. I wasn't family to them. I was an obstacle. People don't wake up one morning and realize they've become invisible. It happens the way salt eats metal, quietly, patiently, until one day the hinge gives out and the door no longer closes. After that dinner, after the applause faded and the plates were cleared by hands that never reached for mine, I went upstairs alone. I told myself I was tired, that I needed air, that I didn't want to crowd their happiness. That was the language I'd been using for years. The guest room I slept in, because the master bedroom had been temporarily claimed when they moved in, still smelled faintly of lavender and sun-warmed cotton. My suitcase sat half unpacked in the corner, as it had for 3 years now, because something in me knew better than to settle completely. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands. They looked older than I remembered, the skin thinner, veins more pronounced, hands that had cooked thousands of meals, signed permission slips, wiped tears, balanced checkbooks, stitched hems late at night under yellow lamps, hands that had given and given until giving felt like breathing. Automatic, unquestioned. I used to think that kind of love came back to you. I had raised my son alone after his father left with a suitcase and a note that said I need more. I worked 2 jobs then, one that paid the bills, one that fed the hope that someday I wouldn't be tired all the time. I missed dinners, I missed school assemblies, I missed myself, but I never missed him. When he got into college, I sold my first house and downsized without complaint. When he married her, bright smile, sharper eyes, I paid for the flowers and said nothing when she changed the seating chart so my friends were pushed to the back. It's just one day, I told myself. That phrase followed me like a stray dog. When they needed help with a down payment, I dipped into my savings. When they wanted to try coastal living, I offered the beach house for a year. When that year stretched into 3, I learned to ask before opening my own refrigerator. At first, they asked my opinion. Then they informed me. Then they stopped mentioning plans altogether. Holidays shifted without notice. Thanksgiving was suddenly Friendsgiving. Christmas was too much travel for the baby, a baby that didn't exist yet, but already seemed to outrank me. I found out about birthdays through photos posted online, my absence cropped out with careful precision. I told myself this was the natural order of things. Children grow up, parents step back, love matures into something quieter. But love shouldn't feel like being placed gently, and then firmly, on a shelf. Furniture. That was the word that came to me one afternoon when I overheard her on the phone. No, she won't mind, my daughter-in-law said, pacing the living room with her back to me. She's very low maintenance, like a couch you don't have to dust. She laughed. I stood in the doorway, unseen, holding a basket of folded laundry that suddenly felt ridiculous in my arms. That night, I cried in the bathroom with the fan running so no one would hear me, not because of what she'd said, but because part of me believed it was true. I had trained them to expect my silence, my flexibility, my endless accommodation. I had mistaken endurance for virtue. The beach house had been my last anchor, bought with the settlement money from a job I stayed in 20 years longer than I should have, maintained meticulously, paid off early. It was meant to be my final chapter, the place where mornings were slow, where I'd drink coffee barefoot and listen to the tide instead of other people's needs. Somewhere along the way, it became leverage. They spoke about it as if it were already theirs. Renovations planned without me, rental income discussed in front of me as if I were a guest. My name disappearing from conversations the way it had disappeared from decisions. And I let it happen. Because mothers are taught that resistance looks like selfishness, that boundaries are betrayals, that saying no is the first step toward being alone. So I smiled, I nodded, I moved my things into smaller spaces. Until that dinner. Until the wine glass. Until she told me in front of everyone that I no longer needed the life I had built. That night, lying in the guest bed, I replayed the moment again and again, not with tears this time, but with a strange, sharpening focus. I saw how easily she lied, how confidently she assumed my compliance, how natural it felt for my son to let her speak for both of them. And I felt something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Not anger, clarity. I realized then that I had been generous long past the point of generosity, that what they called love was comfort and what they called family was convenience. And furniture, I thought, only stays useful as long as it stays still. I turned off the light and stared into the dark, listening to the ocean breathe below the windows. For the first time in years, I didn't wonder how to make things easier for them. I wondered what would happen if I finally stood up. And the morning after the announcement, the house felt different. Not quieter, controlled. I woke early as I always had, my body still loyal to habits no one needed anymore. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and burnt coffee. She had already rearranged the counter. The small ceramic bowl I used for keys was gone, replaced by a white marble tray she'd ordered online. My mug, chipped, blue, familiar, had been pushed to the back of the cabinet in favor of matching cream-colored ones. A small thing. But small things are how territory is claimed. She sat at the island when I entered, scrolling on her phone, both hands wrapped around another cup of coffee. I noticed she drank it black now. No cream, no sugar. She glanced up and smiled. Tight, practiced. "We were just talking," she said, nodding towards the living room where my son's voice hummed indistinctly. "About the house." There it was. I poured myself tea and waited. Silence had become my armor, though I hadn't yet realized it was also becoming my weapon. "We think it's best," she continued, "if you put the sale on hold, at least until after the baby arrives." I didn't correct her. "Not yet." My son appeared then, leaning against the doorway with his arms crossed. He wouldn't look at me directly. He never did when he wanted something. "Mom," he said gently, as if approaching a skittish animal, "this isn't about control. It's about family." Family. The word had been sanded down until it meant obedience. I took a sip of tea. It tasted weak. "I already spoke with a realtor," I said. "The market's strong. If I wait too long—" She cut me off with a soft laugh. "Oh, sweetie," she said. "You don't need to worry about the market anymore." I looked up then. The way she said it, light, almost kind, made my stomach tighten. "We're thinking long-term," she went on. "This place could be a legacy, something you'd want to pass down, especially now." She placed a hand on her stomach again. The gesture was smooth, rehearsed. My son nodded. "We've already talked to a contractor," he added, "just to get ideas." Ideas? They spoke like the decision had already been made, like I was being informed of a weather change rather than the redirection of my life. "And my plans?" I asked. She tilted her head, considering me. "Well," she said slowly, "you've always said you didn't need much, and assisted living places near the city are actually quite nice now. Very social." What's assisted living? The words landed with a dull thud, like a door closing somewhere deep inside me. I had imagined downsizing to a small apartment near the park, morning walks, a book club, independence. I had not imagined being managed. "You'd be closer to doctors," my son added quickly, "and we could visit, as if I were already somewhere else." I realized then that the pregnancy wasn't just news. It was leverage, a moral shield, a blunt instrument, a way to make any resistance look cruel. Who argues with a baby? Who prioritizes herself over new life? They watched me carefully, waiting for the familiar response. The sigh, the reluctant smile, the capitulation dressed up as grace. I felt it rise in me out of habit. Then something else rose with it. Memory. The wine glass. The bottle I'd seen her finish the night before. A vintage I'd been saving for a milestone of my own, the way she'd drunk freely, confidently, without hesitation. I looked at her now, her steady hands, her relaxed posture, no nausea, no caution. I said nothing. And in that nothing, I felt the ground shift. Because for the first time, I understood the full shape of what they were doing. This wasn't thoughtlessness. It was strategy. They were building a story where my refusal would make me the villain, where my compliance would erase me quietly, cleanly, without guilt. I set my cup down. "I need time," I said. She smiled again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course," she said. "Take all the time you need." But the message beneath it was clear. Time was no longer mine. That afternoon, I walked alone down the beach. The sand was cool, damp near the waterline. Gulls cried overhead, fighting over scraps. I breathed in the salt and let the wind sting my eyes. I thought about how easily I'd been cornered, and how little they suspected what I still held. That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't cry. I counted. Dates, conversations, documents, moments I'd dismissed as irrelevant because no one had ever challenged me before. I realized something then, with a calm that felt almost surgical. They believed the pregnancy made them untouchable. They believed I was afraid of being alone. They believed the house was already theirs. And belief, I knew, is a dangerous thing to rely on, especially when it's wrong. The bottle was still on the counter the next morning. Empty, rinsed, placed carefully beside the recycling bin like an afterthought that didn't deserve ceremony. It was a Chateau Margaux, 1996. I knew because I had bought it myself during a work trip to Bordeaux, back when my passport was still thick with stamps and my life still felt like it belonged to me. I'd planned to open it the day I signed the papers to sell the beach house, a quiet toast to survival, to endings chosen instead of forced. She had opened it without asking. I picked it up and turned it slowly in my hands. The label was slightly torn at the corner, the way it always tore when peeled too fast. My fingers rested where the glass curved inward, cool and familiar. I didn't feel anger. I felt certainty. I had volunteered for a medical non-profit years ago, helping women navigate complicated pregnancies. I had sat in fluorescent rooms with terrified teenagers and hopeful 40-year-olds. I knew timelines, symptoms, risks. I knew what doctors said and what they never did. And I knew this. No woman newly pregnant drinks a full bottle of wine casually unless she knows something everyone else doesn't. I set the bottle down and stood very still, listening to the house wake up around me. A door creaked. Water ran. Her voice floated down the hall light and unconcerned. Something inside me hardened. Not into bitterness, but into clarity so sharp it almost felt like relief. I had been reacting for years. Now I would act. I didn't confront her. That was the old version of me, the one who believed truth alone was enough. Instead, I made eggs. I watered the plants. I nodded through conversation like a woman already gone. Inside, I was rearranging everything. I replayed the dinner in my mind, not emotionally, but analytically. The way she had positioned herself at the head of the table, the timing of the announcement, just days after I mentioned listing the house, the confidence with which she spoke about my future. This wasn't impulse. It was planning. And that meant there were weaknesses. I went to the small desk in the corner of the guest room and opened my laptop. The hum of it felt louder than it should have. I logged into my email, then into a folder I hadn't touched in years. Trust documents, property deeds, financial statements. I had set it all up after my husband left, not out of paranoia, but necessity. When you learn how quickly someone can decide you're inconvenient, you learn to protect what remains. The beach house was not owned by me outright. It was owned by a trust. My trust. Irrevocable, structured, silent. Their names weren't on it. Not my son's, not hers. No future child's. I stared at the screen, feeling something loosen in my chest. A knot I hadn't known was there. I had power. Not loud power, not flashy power. The kind that waits. Gosh, I closed the laptop and smiled at my reflection in the darkened screen. I looked different, straighter somehow, as if I had finally aligned with myself instead of bending around others. That afternoon, she cornered me in the hallway. "You've been quiet," she said, studying my face. "Are you okay?" There it was again, the performance of concern. "I'm fine," I said. She searched my eyes, perhaps looking for guilt or fear or the softening she was used to seeing. She found nothing. "Well," she said lightly, "don't overthink things. Stress isn't good at your age." I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded and stepped past her, my shoulder brushing hers just enough for her to notice. That night, lying in bed, I didn't rehearse arguments. I didn't plan speeches. I planned moves. I would let them continue, let them assume, let them grow bolder. People reveal the most when they believe they're winning. The wine bottle had done more than expose a lie. It had returned something to me I hadn't felt in years. Control. And I was very patient with it. Silence is misunderstood. People think it means weakness, retreat, surrender, confusion. They mistake the absence of noise for the absence of thought. I used to believe that too. I had filled silences my whole life, smoothing them over with reassurance, explanations, apologies no one had asked for. Now I let silence stretch. At breakfast, I answered only what was asked. Yes, no, I'm not sure. I didn't volunteer opinions about paint colours or nursery layouts. I didn't react when she talked about our future here, gesturing broadly at rooms I'd paid for down to the last nail. They noticed. Of course they did. She watched me from behind her phone, her smile faltering when I didn't rise to the bait. My son grew louder, more animated, as if volume alone could summon my agreement. "Mum, you should see the crib we're thinking about," he said one afternoon, holding up a tablet. "Solid wood. Really well made." I glanced at the screen. "I'm sure it is." That was all. The pause that followed was exquisite. Silence, I learned, makes people nervous. The rush to fill it, to explain themselves, to justify, and in doing so, they show you exactly who they are and what they fear. She began to overreach. She talked openly on the phone now, pacing the living room with her back half turned to me, assuming I was too old or too meek to understand what she was saying. "Yeah, if we wait until the second trimester, it'll be harder for her to argue," she whispered once, though not quietly enough. "People expect grandmothers to be generous." Another time. "Once it's legally our primary residence, things get simpler." I stored these sentences away carefully, like documents placed in a fireproof box. My son changed too. He started framing everything as concern for my health, my stress levels, my memory. "You forgot your appointment yesterday," he said one morning, frowning. "I rescheduled it," I replied. "Oh," he said, disappointed. They wanted a narrative where I was slipping, just enough to justify stepping in, taking over, managing me. I let them believe it was working. I started leaving the room when conversations turned strategic. I smiled vaguely when she corrected me in front of others. I allowed her to help with things I could still do easily, carrying groceries, managing mail. Underestimation is a gift. While they grew comfortable, I grew precise. I began writing things down. Dates, times, exact wording. I saved voicemails. I took photos of documents left carelessly on the counter, contractor estimates, bank letters not addressed to me. At night, when the house slept, I reviewed trust language and state property laws. The glow of my laptop, a quiet companion. The click of the trackpad felt deliberate, final. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was restoring balance. One evening, she poured herself another glass of wine, white this time, and caught me watching. "Oh," she said, lightly touching her stomach again. "Don't worry. My doctor says an occasional glass is fine." I smiled. "Of course," I said. "Doctors know best." Her eyes narrowed just a fraction. Silence had begun to speak for me. They started making mistakes then, small ones, but telling. She contradicted herself about due dates. He mentioned financial plans that assumed my absence. They discussed renting out the guest house, forgetting I was still sleeping in it. I moved through it all like a ghost. And ghosts, I've learned, are most dangerous when they're underestimated. By the end of that week, they believed they had won. The house felt like theirs. My resistance, in their minds, had softened into resignation. They had no idea that every quiet moment, every nod, every carefully chosen non-response was tightening the net. Silence wasn't my surrender. It was my preparation. The law office smelled like old paper and lemon polish. It always had. The building sat 3 blocks off the main street, easy to miss if you didn't know it was there. I'd chosen it years ago for that very reason. Power, I had learned, didn't need a glass facade. Margaret Ellis looked up from her desk when I entered and removed her reading glasses slowly, deliberately. She had known me through 3 decades of quiet decisions and careful protection. She didn't ask how I was. She asked, what changed? I sat across from her and placed my folder on the desk. The weight of it felt reassuring. Real. They're trying to stop me from selling the beach house, I said. Using a pregnancy. Margaret's mouth tightened. Is it real? No. She nodded once as if checking off a box. No surprise, no judgment. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. I spoke plainly. Dates, statements. The dinner, the wine bottle, the pressure. The language of we that had quietly replaced you. I didn't cry, I didn't editorialize. I laid it out the way I had learned to lay out budgets and schedules when my life depended on clarity. Margaret listened, pen moving in steady strokes. When I finished, she folded her hands. They've forgotten, she said. Who owns what? She turned her monitor toward me and pulled up the trust documents. The Harbour Trust, established 12 years ago. Sole beneficiary, me. Sole trustee, me. The beach house was an asset of the trust, insulated from marital claims, protected from coercion, unreachable without my explicit consent. The language was airtight, designed for precisely this kind of pressure. They can't sell it, rent it, renovate it, or claim residency rights beyond what you allow, Margaret said. And if they try to assert control, financial or medical, we have recourse. I felt something close to joy then, not happiness, but steadiness, a sense of the ground holding. What about eviction? I asked. Margaret smiled thinly. Whenever you're ready. We discussed strategy, not emotionally, but tactically. Notice periods, documentation, timing, the importance of allowing them to continue revealing intent. People who believe they're entitled rarely hide it well, she said. Before I left, she slid a slim envelope across the desk. In case you need it, she said. Inside were copies of everything that mattered. Ownership, authority, and proof. I walked out into the afternoon light feeling taller. The city noise hummed around me, cars, voices, footsteps, and for the first time in years, it didn't overwhelm me. It energized me. On the drive back to the beach house, I rolled the windows down and let the salt air rush in. I laughed once, out loud, startling myself. They had built their entire plan on one assumption: that I had given everything away. That night, dinner was tense. They were celebratory but watchful, like gamblers sensing a shift in odds they didn't yet understand. She talked about baby names. He talked about refinancing options. I listened. When my son mentioned adding his name eventually to the deed, I met his eyes calmly. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, I said. It was the first boundary I'd spoken aloud in years. He blinked, she stiffened. But they said nothing. And in that silence, I felt the pieces align. They thought the law was on their side because they had youth, momentum, and noise. They had forgotten something simple. Paper remembers. And soon, so would they. Once you know where you stand, preparation becomes almost peaceful. I stopped wondering if I was doing the right thing and focused instead on how cleanly it could be done. Emotion clouds timing. Clarity sharpens it. I began with the house itself. I walked through each room early in the mornings, while the light was still soft and forgiving, taking inventory, not just of objects, but of meaning. The dining table where I'd hosted decades of laughter now felt like a stage I was no longer willing to perform on. The living room couch, replaced once already at her insistence, still held the faint indentation where I used to sit with my legs tucked under me, reading in the evenings. I photographed everything. Not sentimentally, practically. Artwork, furniture, appliances, serial numbers, condition. Ownership isn't just declared, it's documented. I moved important items into a locked trunk in my car. Jewelry with histories longer than my marriage, letters from my mother, financial papers they hadn't yet discovered. Each removal felt like reclaiming a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Inside the house, I grew smaller on purpose. I let her take over the kitchen entirely. I asked before opening cabinets. I thanked her for meals I had once made myself. I gave them the illusion of dominance because illusion breeds carelessness. She stopped lowering her voice on calls. "We should push her to sign something soon," she said one afternoon, standing 10 feet from me, "before she changes her mind." I noted the phrasing. Another evening, she joked to a friend on speakerphone. "It's basically ours already. She just doesn't know how to let go." I noted that too. At night, I typed summaries of each conversation, attaching timestamps and context. I forwarded copies to a private email account they didn't know existed. I backed everything up twice. Preparation is repetition. My son avoided me more now. Guilt sat on him awkwardly like a coat he couldn't shrug off. He compensated by becoming brusque. "You don't need to be involved in this," he snapped once when I asked about a contractor. "It's stressful enough." "I agree," I said calmly. "I don't need to be involved." The relief on his face was immediate. They began setting dates without me. A baby shower, a renovation start, a meeting with a financial planner. Their financial planner. They believed my withdrawal was acceptance. It was disengagement. Emotionally, I detached in layers. First from hope, because hope had kept me pliable. Then from guilt, because guilt had been taught, not earned. What remained was resolve. I practiced what I would say when the time came, not aloud, but internally. I stripped language of softness, of qualifiers. "No, I'm sorry. No, I didn't mean." Just statements. Facts. Boundaries. I scheduled one final family dinner. Not because I wanted closure, but because every game deserves a final move. I watched her that week, noticing the cracks in her performance, the way she forgot which symptoms she'd claimed, the casual lifting of heavy objects, the wine glass that kept finding her hand. Confidence had made her sloppy. I could have ended it sooner. But timing matters. And checkmate only works when the board is fully set. On the morning of the dinner, I dressed carefully, not elegantly, but deliberately. Neutral colours, low heels. The weight of the document envelope in my bag was comforting, like a pulse. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a woman I hadn't met before. Older, yes, but unburdened. That night would change everything. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I might lose. I was ready for what I would finally keep. They thought the night was theirs. That was the most important thing. I arrived home late that afternoon to find the house transformed. Candles everywhere, soft music drifting through open windows, a new tablecloth spread across the dining table like a claim. The air smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, rich and heavy, the way celebration meals always are when they're meant to impress. She greeted me with a hand on her stomach and a smile that held too many teeth. "We wanted to do something special," she said. "Mark a new chapter." I nodded and hung my coat. My son looked nervous. He avoided my eyes, adjusting wine glasses with unnecessary precision. The bottle he opened was not one of mine. I'd made sure of that. Guests arrived, friends, extended family, neighbours who had watched my son grow up and now treated me like a footnote. They hugged her, congratulated him, spoke over me. I played my part. I smiled, I poured water, I listened. Halfway through dinner, she stood again, tapping her fork lightly against her glass. "I know we already shared the news," she said, "but tonight feels official." Applause followed. I noticed how she positioned herself, slightly elevated, framed by the ocean behind her. She knew how to command a room. "We've decided," she continued, "that this house will be the baby's first home, a place filled with family. Permanence." She glanced at me then, just briefly, like a queen acknowledging a subject. "And we're so grateful," she added, "that everyone agrees it's for the best." The room turned toward me. I felt the weight of it, the expectation, the trap. This was where I was meant to smile, to nod, to surrender publicly so resistance would be impossible later. I folded my napkin carefully and placed it on the table. "I'm glad you're enjoying the evening," I said. A few people laughed politely, unsure if they'd missed something. She continued anyway, buoyed by confidence. "We're even planning a small remodel," she said brightly, "just opening up the master's suite a bit." The master's suite. I met my son's eyes. He flinched. "After all," she went on, "this place should grow with us." I took a slow sip of water. The glass felt cool and steady in my hand. They were pushing too far. Good. Dessert arrived, peach cobbler, my recipe, though she had never acknowledged that. The smell took me back years, to summers when my son was small and sticky-fingered, when joy had been uncomplicated. She took a bite, then stood again. "One more thing," she said. "We've scheduled the first ultrasound next week. It feels real now." I smiled. It reached my eyes. "Does it?" I asked. The room stilled. Not completely, but enough. The kind of pause people feel before a storm, even if they can't yet see the clouds. She laughed lightly. "Of course." I set my fork down. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shaking. I was ready. Because this dinner wasn't their victory lap. It was the board, fully laid out, and they had no idea I was about to flip it. The moment didn't need drama. That surprised me most. I had imagined my heart racing, my voice trembling, my hands betraying me. But as I stood smoothing the front of my jacket, I felt only a quiet precision, as if my body had rehearsed this long before my mind caught up. "I'd like to say something," I said. The room obeyed. That too surprised me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't smile. I waited until every face turned towards me, until expectation tightened the air. "I've been very patient these past few weeks," I continued, "and very quiet. Not because I agreed with what's been decided for me, but because I was listening." My son shifted in his chair. She tilted her head, still smiling, though something flickered behind her eyes. "I want to be clear," I said. "This house is not a shared asset. It is not a family inheritance in waiting. And it is not yours." A murmur rippled through the room. She laughed. "I think we all know—" "No," I interrupted gently. "I don't think you do." I reached into my bag and removed the envelope. Paper makes a particular sound when it slides across polished wood. Soft, final. "These are copies of the trust documents," I said. "The Harbour Trust, established 12 years ago, sole trustee and beneficiary. Me." I let that settle. The beach house belongs to the trust, not to my son, not to his spouse, not to any future child. It cannot be sold, rented, renovated, or claimed without my consent. Silence. Not the awkward kind. The heavy kind. My son stared at the papers as if they might rearrange themselves into something friendlier. She recovered quickly. "That doesn't change the fact that we live here," she said. "That this is our home." I nodded. "You live here because I allowed it." The words were calm, measured, and devastating. She opened her mouth again, but I wasn't finished. "There's also the matter of the pregnancy," I said, turning my gaze fully on her for the first time that night. The smile slipped. I reached down and picked up the empty wine bottle I had placed discreetly beside my chair before dinner. The glass caught the light. "This was opened the night of your announcement," I said. "A 1996 Chateau Margaux, consumed entirely." Someone gasped. "I spent years volunteering in maternal health," I went on. "I know what doctors advise in early pregnancy. I also know what they don't." Her face drained of colour. "I won't speculate publicly," I said, "but I will say this. I will not make life-altering financial decisions based on a claim that cannot withstand basic scrutiny." My son stood abruptly. "Mum?" I raised my hand. "I'm not finished." I turned back to the room. "Effective immediately," I said. "This arrangement ends. You have 30 days to vacate the property. Formal notice will be delivered tomorrow." Her chair scraped back violently. "You can't do this," she said, her voice sharp now, unmasked. "This is cruel." I looked at her steadily. "No," I said. "This is boundaries." The room was silent except for the ocean outside, steady, eternal, indifferent to human schemes. I gathered my papers and sat down. Checkmate doesn't require shouting. It only requires truth and the courage to finally use it. What followed wasn't loud. It was worse than that. It was the sound of a story breaking apart in real time, the quiet, panicked scrambling of people who had believed the ending was already written. My son spoke first, his voice thin and unfamiliar. "Mum, let's talk about this privately." I looked at him. Really looked, and saw the boy he used to be layered beneath the man he'd become. For a moment, something tugged at me. Then I remembered the master suite, the assisted living brochure, the way he had let her speak for him while I shrank. "There's nothing private about what's been decided publicly," I said. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. One of her friends avoided my eyes altogether. Another woman, someone I'd known for years, watched me with something like awe. She laughed suddenly, too loudly. "This is ridiculous," my daughter-in-law said. "You're overreacting. We were just trying to protect the baby." Her hand went to her stomach again, instinctive, desperate. I didn't respond. Silence did it for me. The absence of reassurance made her unravel faster than anger ever could. "You promised," she snapped at my son. "You said she'd never do this." He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression shifted. Doubt crept in where certainty had lived. "I didn't promise," he said quietly. She stared at him, stunned. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in as the narrative they'd built lost its shape. Conversations started up in hushed tones. People checked their phones. One couple made a polite excuse and left. Social gravity was changing direction. She turned back to me, eyes sharp with accusation. "You're humiliating us," she said. I tilted my head. "No, I'm refusing to be humiliated." The distinction mattered. My son sank back into his chair, hands covering his face. I saw realization dawn slowly, painfully. He hadn't planned this, he'd gone along with it, let momentum carry him until momentum hit a wall. The wine glasses sat untouched now. Someone cleared their throat. Another guest murmured, "I think we should give them space." They filed out awkwardly, the celebration dissolving into a mess of half-eaten dessert and extinguished candles. When the door finally closed behind the last of them, the house exhaled. She rounded on me. "You've ruined everything," she said. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes," I said. "I've ended something that should never have started." She paced, hands shaking now, voice rising. "You'll regret this. He'll regret this." I looked at my son. He didn't look back. The power in the room had shifted, irrevocably. The roles were no longer what they'd been an hour earlier. I wasn't the obstacle anymore. I was the authority. She seemed to realize it then, the futility of charm, of outrage, of performance. Her shoulders slumped. "You're choosing property over family," she said, quieter now. I stood. "I'm choosing myself," I replied, for the first time. She stared at me, searching for the old version, the woman who would soften, who would bend. She didn't find her. Upstairs, I could hear drawers opening and closing, sharp and frantic. The illusion of permanence had shattered, and with it, her composure. I walked to the window and looked out at the dark ocean. The tide moved in and out, unconcerned with human drama. Behind me, my son spoke. "Mom, I didn't think it would end like this." I turned to him. "Neither did I said. "But it was always going to end." Some truths don't destroy families. They reveal what was already broken. The notice arrived the next morning. White envelope, heavy paper, no drama. I placed it on the kitchen island where she couldn't miss it, right beside the marble tray she'd replaced my bowl with. The contrast amused me. legal language beside curated aesthetics. She found it first. I heard the sharp intake of breath from the hallway, the sound of paper being torn open too quickly. "You actually did it," she said, her voice carrying. "You actually served us papers." I sipped my tea. "Yes." My son stood behind her, pale, exhausted. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, like someone who'd realized too late that comfort had cost him integrity. "This is real," he said quietly. "It always was," I replied. The notice was polite, precise, 30 days, terms clearly stated, no ambiguity, no room for negotiation masquerading as emotion. She cycled through outrage quickly then, threats, tears, disbelief. "You can't just throw us out," she said. "People don't do this to their children." I met her eyes. "People don't push their parents into erasure either." That seemed to land. The next few days passed in a strange calm. The house became a place of parallel lives, shared walls, separate realities. She packed loudly. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if each object carried weight he hadn't expected. I didn't rush them. Authority doesn't need urgency. Margaret handled everything else: utilities, formal timelines, a quiet call to ensure local enforcement would be present if necessary, not as a threat, but as a safeguard. On day 28, a moving truck arrived. She avoided me entirely then. No goodbye, no apology, just resentment, sharpened into silence. My son hesitated at the door. "I didn't think you'd go this far," he said. "I didn't think I'd need to," I answered. He nodded once, eyes wet, and left. When the door closed behind them, the house felt hollow, and then, slowly, whole. I walked through each room, opening windows, letting the ocean air reclaim the space. I removed the tablecloth, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer I would likely never open again. The locks were changed that afternoon. The sound of the final click echoed louder than it should have. Not because it was cruel, but because it was complete. I didn't watch their lives unravel up close. That was the final mercy I gave myself. But distance doesn't stop truth from traveling. It arrives anyway, through phone calls that hesitate too long before speaking, through names mentioned carefully, through the particular tone people use when they think they're delivering bad news, but are really just confirming what you already knew. It started with the apartment. They had assumed the beach house would bridge them comfortably into whatever came next. Without it, options narrowed quickly. Coastal rents were unforgiving. Credit, it turned out, was less generous when optimism wasn't backed by assets. "They're staying with her sister for now," a neighbour told me casually one afternoon, eyes flicking towards the house as if expecting movement. I nodded. That makes sense. Then came the job change. My son had turned down a promotion months earlier, something about stability, about needing flexibility for the baby. That decision couldn't be undone. Opportunities rarely wait for clarity. He called me late one evening, voice tight. "I didn't realize how much I was counting on things staying the same," he said. "I know," I replied. That was all. The pregnancy story collapsed more quietly, but more completely. There was no announcement, no explanation, just the slow disappearance of references, photos deleted, baby shower cancelled with vague excuses about complications and privacy. People noticed. They always do. When a story vanishes without resolution, it leaves a vacuum, and vacuums invite speculation. She stopped attending gatherings where questions might be asked. Friends drifted, invitations slowed, sympathy, when unearned, curdles quickly into suspicion. I heard, through someone who didn't mean to tell me, that she'd started correcting people sharply when they brought it up. "It was never anyone's business," she'd said. That phrase tends to appear when a lie has reached its limit. The marriage followed. Not dramatically, not with shouting or headlines, just erosion. My son began staying later at work. She began traveling to clear her head. Distance masqueraded as self-care until it became permanent. When he finally came by to collect the last of his things, a box of childhood photos I'd set aside for him, he looked hollowed out. She wanted a life that didn't require patience, he said quietly, and I wanted peace without confrontation. I handed him the box. Those wants don't coexist, I said. He nodded. They separated within the year. No scandal, no victory parade. Just consequences unfolding exactly as they should. What surprised me most wasn't their collapse. It was how little satisfaction I felt watching it. Because revenge had never been the point. Restoration was. I slept better, ate better, laughed more easily. The house returned to itself. Not just physically, but energetically. Spaces felt lighter without strategy in them. Sometimes, late at night, I sat on the deck with a blanket and listened to the tide, the same sound it had made during the dinner, during the reveal, during the locking of doors. Constant. Unmoved. Their downfall wasn't loud. It was instructive. It reminded me that when people build their lives on entitlement, they don't need enemies. They only need reality to arrive. The first morning alone felt unfamiliar. Not lonely, unclaimed. I woke without an agenda pressing against my ribs, without the subtle tension of anticipating someone else's needs. The sunlight spilled across the bedroom floor in a way I hadn't noticed before, warming the wood, lingering as if it finally had permission. I brewed coffee and drank it on the deck, barefoot, wrapped in an old sweater that smelled faintly of sea air and time. No one corrected how strong I made it. No one commented on the mug I chose. Freedom, I learned, often arrives quietly. I reclaimed the house room by room. The guest room became mine again, not because it was larger, but because I chose it. I moved the bed to face the window. I brought my books out of storage, stacking them in imperfect towers. I hung photographs she'd deemed too busy, their frames catching light like memory made solid. I repainted the kitchen, not trendy white, but a soft, lived-in blue, the kind of colour that forgives fingerprints. I brought back my ceramic bowl and placed my keys inside it ceremonially, like returning a crown. Each small decision stitched something back together. I joined a morning walking group that met near the pier, women my age and older, all of us carrying histories we didn't announce. We talked about weather, books, joints that complained too loudly. We laughed without apology. On Thursdays, I volunteered again, this time by choice, not obligation. I sat with women who were navigating change later in life, listening more than speaking. When I did speak, it was carefully, honestly. "You're allowed to take up space," I told one woman, watching her eyes fill with recognition. Even now, especially now. I travelled lightly, short trips, places I'd postponed for years. I ate meals alone without feeling watched. I learned which silences were peaceful and which were instructive. Occasionally, my son called. We spoke kindly, carefully, the way people do when love remains but illusion has burned away. I didn't offer advice. I didn't rescue. That chapter was closed. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky bruised into purple and gold, I opened the Chateau Margaux I'd saved. This time, I poured one glass. I held it up to the light, watched it glow and toasted, not to endurance, not to family, not even to justice, but to myself, to the woman who had finally stopped shrinking. I used to think becoming older meant becoming smaller, less visible, less necessary, a gradual retreat from the center of things until you were safely out of the way. I had absorbed that belief the way women of my generation absorbed so many others, without questioning who benefited from it. Now I know better. What changed wasn't my circumstances. It was my posture. I stopped apologizing with my body, standing too quickly to accommodate, folding inward when challenged, softening my voice to make others comfortable. I learned that strength doesn't announce itself. It settles. Aging, I discovered, is not a diminishing. It is a distillation. You lose what was never essential and are left with something sharper, truer. I thought often about the years I had spent yielding, about the way I had mistaken love for compliance and patience for virtue. I didn't judge that woman harshly. She had survived the best way she knew how. But she wasn't the woman I was anymore. The woman I became understood boundaries not as walls, but as definitions. This is mine. This is not. This I will share. This I will protect. The clarity was bracing. I learned to sit with discomfort instead of rushing to soothe it, to let other people's disappointment belong to them, to trust that being respected was better than being liked. Most of all, I learned that power does not corrupt when it's rooted in self-respect. It clarifies. I watched other women my age awaken to this truth in their own ways, through divorce, through illness, through loss, through a single moment when they realized they had been editing themselves out of their own lives. We compared notes quietly. We smiled knowingly. There is a particular freedom that comes when you realize you are no longer auditioning for approval. You simply are. I had not become harder. I had become whole. There is a lie we tell older women, that love means endurance, that family requires erasure, that dignity is something you trade for peace. I believed that lie for a long time. I believed that if I stayed agreeable, stayed useful, stayed quiet, I would be safe from abandonment, that if I made myself smaller, there would always be room for me. But the truth is simpler and harder. People do not respect sacrifice they did not have to earn. They only notice boundaries once they collide with them. What saved me was not anger or revenge or even courage in the way stories like to dramatize it. What saved me was self-recognition. The moment I understood that my life did not lose value because others found it inconvenient. Love that demands your disappearance is not love. Family that thrives on your silence is not family. And peace that requires self-betrayal is only a pause before the next violation. I did not win because I outsmarted anyone. I won because I finally stood where I belonged, inside my own authority. If there is one thing I would leave behind, it is this. You do not need permission to take up space. You do not need a crisis to justify boundaries. And it is never too late to choose yourself. The ocean still moves outside my windows. The house still holds my footsteps. And I wake each morning knowing that what I have now was not taken, it was reclaimed. And that, finally, is enough.